terms of sort of, obviously there have been companies who have had to take cost-cutting measures, have had to make redundancies or put people on 4-day weeks. And it's strange, we may have two candidates come to us and say exactly the same thing. Oh, I've been put on a 4-day week. This is terrible. I can't believe they're doing this to me. And others who have completely understood and said, yes, we're doing it. We understand why it's done. And I think it really shows that the communication is important. And I suppose that kind of then flips around to a change to you in terms of if these changes are being made from kind of a business perspective to sort of, I suppose, say the continuity of the business going forward. Can employers kind of unilaterally make changes to contract terms? How should they deal with redundancies in Hong Kong? Sort of all, perhaps you can sort of chat us through some of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been quite a lot of that over the last year or so in terms of trying to respond particularly to the financial pressures that that companies have faced as a result of the pandemic. And I think, I mean, there have been redundancies, and in some cases quite sort of large scale redundancies. I mean, I think one of the most high profile ones was probably Cathay Pacific. But I think before talking about redundancies per se, I think, you know, employers have tended to look at, are there other approaches they could take before reaching that more draconian point where they feel they need to actually let people go. So, you know, people have looked a lot at things like asking people to take pay cuts, asking people to forego fixed bonuses, in some cases trying to reduce the number of working hours or the number of working days that people are working, and trying to approach it in that way. But the short answer is that all of those things are to change those things, and it's not something that an employer can do unilaterally, because it represents a change of contract terms, a variation of contract, and therefore it's necessary to get employee consent before you make any of those changes. So in that scenario, I think people have looked at making the changes, but the key to it really has been how you communicate with employees on that, and how you go through that process of trying to implement that. And my impression is that the companies that have had more strategy and given sort of more thought to how they go through this process have tended to find it an easier thing to implement in the end, because of the way that they've gone about it. I mean, there's obviously, I mean, in Hong Kong, given that and this contrasts quite strongly with mainland China, where much more difficult to implement unilateral terminations or redundancies. You know, in Hong Kong, because that tends to be an easier process, there is, I suppose, always the threat that, well, if you don't accept these changes that we're trying to make, then, you know, you may find that you're made redundant. So so that in a lot of cases does act as kind of leverage, but I think the approach of going in and trying to explain what the challenges are that the company is facing, the particular financial pressures that you're facing, and trying to show that as an employer you've gone through a process of trying to work out what can you do on the one hand to help the company situation, but on the other hand taking into account the needs of employees, and trying not to have too harsh an impact on employees. The more you can do in that sense tends to make the process go to go more smoothly. And I suppose the key sort of buzzwords are the two C's of communication on the one hand, and making sure that your communication is very clear and full about what's proposed and what's happening, and the other is consistency. So making sure that that you don't have groups of employees who feel that they are being treated differently from other groups of employees in the way that you implement things, and essentially trying to show to employees that what you're trying to achieve is sort of reasonable in the circumstances and being applied fairly.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, moving on to redundancies, I mean, the same things apply really. I mean, the way in which you go about it often makes a big difference. I mean, it's an emotive thing for individuals. Nobody generally wants to be made redundant, particularly at an uncertain time in terms of getting new positions and so on. But there is, there is that possibility in Hong Kong to go that route for employers. But again, sort of trying to do it in a way that is clearly communicated and not overly aggressive is tends to be the way to go. And I think, I mean, I've seen a few examples recently of situations where individuals have been made redundant, and surprisingly, even though they're being offered the opportunity to sign release agreements and to have a separation package, which would be in excess of statutory entitlements to severance. The time limit for people to agree to these things has been very, very short, and while there isn't, unlike in places like the US, there isn't a sort of there aren't set timelines for allowing people to consider things or cooling off periods in Hong Kong, and similarly there isn't the obligation for individuals to have taken legal advice in respect of a redundancy. Nevertheless, I think my view is that employers, well, just in a few cases, people have been very aggressive with the timelines, and in one case over the Easter holiday, giving someone sort of 5 days to decide, which in itself would be a reasonable period of time. But in the context of Easter and the fact that the Qingming holiday as well was there, it meant that people really probably had about 1.5 days to actually try and seek legal advice, and if they wanted to, and so on. And I think sometimes you can end up sort of having reputational issues as a result of that, and that taking just a slightly more just a slightly more sort of structured approach and trying to consider it from the employee's perspective sometimes could add some value in terms of the way that you go through these processes. But certainly it's something that that is it's ongoing, and it's likely that probably that companies will still face more of those situations where they realize they need to let people go. I was going to ask you, Camilla, about on that sort of front. I mean, I know that during the whole COVID period, a lot of people have had sort of hiring freezes and so on, and I suppose I was wondering also, what do you see for the future in terms of sort of recruitment and hiring and the marketplace, and also wondering, with travel restrictions and things like that, how does this affect expatriates and the number of expatriates working in Hong Kong?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Like, obviously, I think last year in terms of recruitment and hiring, it was definitely very quiet, probably the quietest it's been for a very long time. And I think a lot of companies were just taking sort of a wait and see type attitude. They wanted to kind of wait until they were very confident that they had workloads there. They didn't want to hire and then have to let people go again. And a lot of it was being taken on a global level. So even actually, we did see a lot of people we spoke to said they were really busy in Hong Kong, but if they were working for a firm that had offices in the UK, offices in the US, and there was a global headcount freeze in place, they just couldn't hire in Hong Kong. So we found that sort of up until the end of last year, there was just sort of people's hands were tied. That's definitely changed since January. And I think people are like, right, yes, freezes have been lifted. We need people. And there's been a bit of a panic in that I think people are so busy And that's both in terms of just additional headcounts, or if, say, somebody had left an organization, perhaps relocated or had moved to go and do something else last year, they hadn't been replaced. So people were sort of playing catch up a bit. So at the moment, the outlook is really good. Everyone I speak to seems to be positive. I think sort of definitely sort of the type of work that we're dealing with, lawyers are busy, and that now does seem to be over a wide range of kind of areas, sort of in terms of corporate litigation, and there's the funds. It is sort of busy across the board, which I think definitely is a good sign.